Hello Rebels, welcome to the base. Steve Hilton here. I'm joined today by Elisha Krauss. You've seen her on Fox News, Daily Wire, Washington Examiner. She is great and I'm very excited she's with us today. Make sure you subscribe to California Rebel Base. Have you done that yet? Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We really need your help to get the word out, especially in these last crucial few days before the recall election. Speaking of which, our guest today is John Cox, one of the leading candidates in that race. John, it's great to see you. Really pleased you could join us today.
Thank you.
We've been talking to some of the candidates in the race, and as I say to all of them, I don't think this audience needs convincing about the answer to the first question on the ballot as to whether we should recall Gavin Newsom. I'd love you to just make your case as to why it should be you on the second question.
Well, we've had a succession of career politicians and media celebrities, Steve. They failed. I mean, they haven't gotten the job done, and it's not a surprise because, you know, a chief executive of a state is kind of like a chief executive of a business. You set goals, you hire people to achieve those goals, you hold them accountable for reaching those goals, and you fire them if need be and restructure those goals when circumstances change. And, you know, the trouble with media people is that they're all about talking, but they're not really about doing. And as you know, I've built a business over 40 years by taking action, by getting from point A to point B, fixing problems, getting things solved. And if you look around the nation, you look at states like Maryland and Massachusetts, they're both pretty deeply blue. Frankly, they're more Democrat as a percentage of the voting population than California is. And both Massachusetts and Maryland have Republican businessmen as governors. It was their first job in government, first job in elected office. Hogan and Baker are two of the most popular governors in the country, and their approval ratings are 60% plus. And why? Because they get the job done. They don't necessarily get bogged down in the partisan battles. And, you know, the same thing could be said with Pete Ricketts in Nebraska, with Bill Lee in Tennessee, with Doug Ducey in Arizona. You know, basically two-term governors. Doug Burgum in North Dakota is one of the most popular governors in the country by far. Again, none of those guys were elected to any other job before they became governor, and they're popular. And it's because they get the job done. And that's my agenda, is to get the job done, to fix the massive mismanagement that's going on in California. I mean, I know you call it populism and populism and all those kinds of things, Steve, but really and truly, at the end of the day, populism is all about building a better quality of life for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a practical. Elisha, what your thoughts?
Yeah, Elisha Krauss here. John, it's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, Elisha, nice to see you.
It's been a while. You talk about running a business in the state. My husband runs a business in this state. I am a contract worker in this state. And the economy has really been damaged. Even I think people forget pre-COVID, the California economy wasn't doing that great. And you saw a lot of industry, especially the tech industry, moving to other states like Texas, Florida, even the middle of nowhere in middle America to recoup these lost dollars. What would you do bringing your business experience to the table to make California more business friendly?
Well, first of all, it's housing, it's taxes, it's lawsuits, and it's regulation. So let's deal with all four of those. Housing is actually the biggest issue because so many businesses have basically said to me, I can't recruit people from other parts of the country to come to California because you know, a 2,000 square foot house here is $1.5 million. I mean, you can buy a great house in Texas for a third of that. I mean, so getting people to come to California for the housing is ridiculous. It's a great place to live. It's great weather. But if you're working two jobs in order to be able to afford it, what good does it do? The taxes are outrageous here. The tax bracket between 58,000 and 300,000 of income, which is basically middle class in California, is 9.3%, Elisha. 9.3%. That's more than twice the tax on millionaires in Colorado, for example. So, you know, you look at the taxes. And by the way, we have one of the highest sales taxes in the country. We have the highest gas tax. We have a corporate tax. So, the idea, and our property taxes, everybody says are low at 1%. But remember, it's 1% of a number that's triple what other states are spending for houses, right? So our real estate taxes are actually one of the highest in the country when you factor in the cost of homes. So housing is a huge one. Taxes are another one. Lawsuits. I mean, California, you have no idea. I guess your husband does, the risks and the cost of getting into business with the lawsuits. We are the judicial hellhole of all hellholes. The trial lawyers basically control the state. And then you've got regulations. I mean, the regulations, not just the environmental, but payroll and work and all kinds of other regulations that just, you need a license in this state to shampoo someone's hair. Now think about that for a second. Steve, you don't have to worry about that.
Exactly. I'm fine with that.
You're fine with that, Steve. Elisha, you may have a problem with that, but if you need a license to shampoo hair along with 100 hours of continuing education, how do you start a business? How do you actually get on that ladder to a success? As you guys might know, I started at the bottom. I had no father growing up. I started my own business when I was 25, and I have built it. But I started it in Illinois. Frankly, I didn't start it in California. But I don't know how anybody could start a business here these days. It's almost impossible.
So what's the plan, though? I totally hear
you. Got to dismantle that. Yeah.
I think no argument here about what you've laid out. I guess the question is specifically in terms of what you could do about it, given the reality, the constraints of the fact that a lot of that is in the hands of the legislature. If you were to be successful, you still got this Democratic supermajority in the state legislature. So how can you make some progress on those practical things just by yourself?
And see, this is where I draw a distinction between myself and the radio guy. I like Larry. I was on his show. He's really good at focusing on issues and stuff. But let's face it, he's an entertainer, and he's also in your face. And he's gonna, if he gets elected, he'll spend a good amount of time fighting with the media, fighting with the legislature, and it'll be entertaining as all get out. But I'm not sure we'll get things done. See, I'm a builder. I've managed and built for 40 years. So the first thing I do in office is I start building this party back. And I identify the top 20 assemblymen that are most exposed. I identify the top 10 senators that we could turn in terms of districts. I'm not going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not going to sit out in a tent and try to smoke cigars and cajole these guys into helping me. I know what motivates these guys, and it's special interest money and getting reelected. I'm going to go right at them and recruit candidates, raise money. I've got a plan to go after the independent voters. There's 7 million voters in this state, which is about a third who are not affiliated with either party. They're not registered R. They're not registered D. 7 million, a third. They're persuadable. They're people that we could have common ground with. They're people that want a better business climate. They want lower taxes. They want water. They want electricity. They want wildfires under control. They want homelessness ended. They want an affordable home. Those are people that are reachable, guys. And the day I'm elected, I start doing something on that statewide. You don't know this, but in 2018, after I lost, I started an organization that was hiring military veterans to knock on the doors of these independent voters. I tried this out in 4 congressional districts. By the way, those were the 4 congressional districts that flipped in 2020. It works. The independent voters of the state, the ones who are unaffiliated, I just told you about 7 million, they don't feel like being part of either party. They don't like either party.
I think it's interesting. Look, that's a very
Yeah.
different answer to, we've spoken to a number of the other candidates, as I mentioned. They all have a
Right.
slightly different, everyone accepts the reality of the
Yes.
politics and how you get things done. Everyone has a slightly different answer. Larry's talking about state of emergency, declaration of
Right.
emergency on homelessness and wildfires. And Caitlyn Jenner's talking about putting different people into the agencies that will act differently.
And they'll
on
be in
things like
court all
water.
day long.
Well, but it's interesting. You're talking about the long-term change, and I do like the sound of that. I mean, partly that's the reason I wanted to start this show, because I think that it is a long-term effort to turn things around in the state, and you've got
It
to,
is.
see it as that. So it's interesting to hear you say that. But Elisha, what do you think? I mean, to your point about people wanting something to happen, quickly on especially the economic stuff. I don't know. Feels a little like that's going to take too long. Elisha?
Well, we're only going to have a year. I'll have to run for re-election in 2022. But I really think the voters, if they see me making these efforts right off the get-go to try to fix these problems, I think they'll give me another 4 years.
So I'm very curious in your past, I know that you were previously a registered Democrat. And as you mentioned, I mean, the majority of voters in this state are also registered Democrats. So tell us about your switch to the Republican Party, the why behind that, and then how you think that helps you appeal to Democratic voters.
Well, okay, let's be real, though. That was when I was 20 years old. I ran for delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1976. So I was 21, turning 21 in that summer. My mom was a Democrat. My mom was a teacher. She was a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. So I grew up, I didn't even know what a Republican was. I mean, I became a CPA by the time I was 20. And I started looking at what tax rates were, and I heard about a guy named Ronald Reagan out in California who was running for president in 1979, 1980, and Jack Kemp, who was talking about cutting tax rates and generating economic growth. And I was a CPA doing tax returns for people paying tax at 70%. Interesting factoid: I did the tax return for the group that invested in the movie Saturday Night Fever. It was a bunch of personal injury lawyers from St. Louis who wanted tax write-offs. Okay. Needless to say, they got tax write-offs one year and then had huge income the next. So you know what the next movie was that they invested in? Grease.
Wow.
So they gave up on movies after that. And then Reagan killed the movie tax shelter industry. But, that's why I became a Republican, because I saw how dysfunctional government was. I saw IRS and a lot of government agencies that were the problem. They weren't the solution. And that's what Reagan's message was to us. And Reagan, remember, brought us back. We were flat on our back in the 70s. I mean, I grew up in that time frame. I remember waiting in gas lines. I remember the Iran hostage situation. And Joe Biden is the second coming, by the way, of Jimmy Carter. And we need another Reagan right now. We need someone to tell us that government's not the solution, that government is the problem here. And California, by the way, is the best example of that. You couldn't create a better example of government mismanagement and basically pseudo-socialism being tried than in California to just disastrous results. I mean,
I do have a quick follow-up to that. It's fascinating to me that you mentioned that your mom was a teacher in a teachers union, especially because here I think the incestuous relationship and frankly corruption that is out in the open that nobody seems to care that much about between Democrats in this state, like previous Governor Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi. How do you plan on exposing and fixing the major issue between teachers unions in this state and Democrats in power?
It's so fascinating to see that, because Larry is making a big play for that, and I applaud him for it. I, just like him, I grew up in the south side of Chicago. He grew up in the south side of LA, but it was basically the same deal. I mean, he saw up close how bad the public schools were in LA. I saw how bad they were in Chicago. And you're right. It's about corruption. It's about the unions. And it's 10 times worse today. I mean, tenure. I mean, you can't fire a teacher, either school system. And I think the good news is that the pandemic may have hit home something here. And that is, the pandemic really laid bare for everybody to see that it really is the union bosses that control everything. And I think there's an opening there. Larry's driving a truck through it, and he's got Gloria Romero, who actually helped me in 2018. I applaud her and I applaud Larry for focusing on it. I think you get Elisha. The answer is I think you go at it head on, and I really think especially Black and brown parents who a lot of them don't have school choice. They have to settle for the public school. I think they want it, and I think this is a civil rights issue in many ways, and I think the pandemic has given us an opening.
It's funny, John. I was going to actually bring up Larry because obviously you were you faced off against Gavin last time in the sort of regular election, and I was going to ask you how you felt, but you mentioned him a lot. I just get the sense that you're pretty annoyed about Larry the way he's kind of coming here. What do you? Is it frustrating to you that you were you carried the torch back in a couple of years ago, and now he's from nowhere. Here he comes. Is that frustrating for you?
Yes. I mean, a year ago, I wrote a big check to the recall. Larry wasn't involved a year ago. I was. And it doesn't give me any claim to it. I mean, listen, the better person should win. I totally agree with that. I guess the question is, Larry and I have far different skills. I mean, for 30 years, he's been on radio talking about the problems. Mm-hmm. For 40 years, I've been building a business, actually solving problems and managing people and getting the job done. I guess the question for voters is who's better equipped? I think if people could take a step back and really know what I'm about and who I am, I think they'd right away conclude that a business person who has this experience is going to be the one. This is the 5th largest economy in the world. There's 300,000 employees in the state of California. By the way, there's no way there should be 300,000 employees.
It's insane.
I'm going to have to make 3,000 appointments when I get into office. Okay. Again, I don't think I should have 3,000 appointments. I think that's illustrative of the fact that government's too darn big. But what experience does Larry have in that regard? He's been on the radio. No offense to you guys in the media, but let me tell you.
I guess I can never run for office because John wouldn't vote for me.
No, I didn't say that. Leadership is leadership. There's certainly been instances in past history of people that have been leaders without having been business people, of course. But you know what? I think in this day and age, with the complexity of life, with all the factors swirling around it, I think it really does help to have a multidisciplinary background, which is what I have. I'm a CPA. I'm a lawyer like Larry, but I'm a business guy, and frankly, those are a skill set I think that is really helpful, and you can see that, like I said, in Charlie Baker and Larry Hogan and Pete Ricketts and Doug Ducey and a whole bunch of business people who have been successful governors. I think it's helpful.
It's a completely fair point, and it's an executive position. And in fact, when you read about how the current incumbent carries out that role, and you talk to people who are around the system in Sacramento, you hear the same things over and over again, that actually it's things like a lack of focus. One day he's on this issue and then he's on the next, and there's no follow-up. And actually it is about the ability to carry out an executive function and take a plan and enact it and make it work. So I think there's a lot to what you're saying. It's just
the comparison to Gavin Newsom is a real important one, Steve, because people need to know that, he claims that he started this business, but he really didn't, you understand. It was started with Gordon Getty's money, and they made sure they had professional managers all the way along the line. He had that capital backing him up, so any mistakes that were made along the way were smoothened over with capital and connections. And, I didn't have that. I had to build this step by step, brick by brick. And that's a very different skill set. But you were going to say, Elisha, something?
Oh, I was just going to add on to what Steve said there. And I think part of the reason why he's like a seesaw is because he's doing whatever the special interests tell him to do, not actually what he promised the voters that he would do, which is why, even some of my most liberal girlfriends here in Southern California shocked me when they would DM me or text me and be like, hey, don't tell anybody, but I signed the recall petition. Logistically, I like to look at numbers. I like to look at P4 voters. I like to look at the data and the polls and the likelihood of this happening. Can you give me a little hope? Like, I'm obviously voting to recall Gavin Newsom, and I'm not sure where I stand on question 2 yet, but is there a hope that this can actually happen?
Yeah, I think there's a very good hope. And it really, had sad to say, it relates to turnout. And this is what Newsom's so scared of, why he's spending all that money. And frankly, the Secretary of State, you understand, in California is spending a fortune to try to gin up turnout, because this is a special election. And the low information voters, let's face it, there's a whole lot of people in the state that don't pay attention to politics like we do. Okay. And they're not necessarily going to vote on September 14th or right now. And I'll tell you why. They're working 2 or 3 jobs. They're trying to take care of their kids. They're getting their kids ready for school. They're doing a whole lot of other things. They don't have time to focus on politics like we do. And I don't think the turnout is going to be all that big on the part of a lot of those voters, which historically have helped the Democrats keep controlling the state. And they come out in November, but September's a different animal, and I'm not sure they're watching all that much TV or they're listening to this. And frankly, I also don't think, Mr. Newsom is an elitist. Let me tell you, I mean, if you look in the dictionary under the word effete snob, you would see his picture, right? I mean, this is a guy who's, never really had to get dirt under his fingernails. And so the idea that a lot of working people are going to look at him as their ideal is, I think, a little far-fetched. So I don't think they're going to really rush to try to defend this guy. They've been hurt in this pandemic. They've been hurt with having their kids out of school. They know that their job is suffer. They know that their cost of living is exorbitant, and the cost of water and electricity and taxes and housing are out of sight. They can see the homelessness. They're not going to defend this guy. I think there's great hope that this is going to happen.
I think that's right. And I think that there's no real enthusiasm. You could see that, by the way, in the way they're campaigning. I mean, it's almost, I think it is literally entirely negative. There's no sort of,
it's all the bad Republicans' fault. Not
That's an incredibly astute observation, Steve, if I must say so. That you don't see an ad saying, "Look at the great job I've done." Early on, he talked about all the money,
or that I will do. Or, if I stay, here's all the great things I will do. I mean, he's completely dropped. There was a moment, again, another example of his sort of lack of focus, where he was talking about roaring back or something. He had this slogan, Californians go roaring back. He dropped that in about 5 minutes because it's so obviously not true. He can't bring himself to say it.
Sadly for your network too, I hate to go back to this, but Larry is the greatest gift, because Larry isn't going to sit idly by and take a punch. Larry is just going to punch back twice as hard. And that's what the base wants, I guess. They want someone that's just going to fight and call people names and carry the banner. And that's wonderful. The trouble is, in California, we only have 5 million Republicans, some number of whom want that fighter. What we have, though, I just said to you, we have 7 million unaffiliated voters who really make the difference. And they don't want that fight. They want a better life. They don't want somebody, I think, that's just going to sit and argue with the media or argue with, the opposing parties. They want someone who's going to deliver water and electricity and a better house and wildfire control and crime prevention. Yeah. The trouble right now is that the polls are showing Larry in the lead because it's that angry segment of Republicans who say, just punch them back twice as hard. And, there's a worth to that, I suppose. But if we're going to get back into power, Steve, if the Republican Party is really going to get back some responsibility in this state so that we can make this state better, we got to show people, especially those independents, those 7 million unaffiliated, that we can actually get the job done. And I'm just dubious of Larry's potential to do that.
Well, I think that's totally right. That delivering practical results, I think, is exactly right. Well, we'll see, John, if you're the man.
Yeah.
And by the way, look, we'll leave it there for now. But look, did you notice I didn't ask you about the bear? I know you get very annoyed when people ask you about the bear.
Thank you so much. The expensive bear, by the way. That bear, was a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I don't know if you know that, but it's a union bear and it's expensive. And I'm a true fiscal conservative, so I've not brought out that bear that much. These consultants want me to use it all over the place, and I said, no, I'm a fiscal conservative.
Well, I think the bear is great, and I'm very glad that you could be with us even without the bear today. So good to see you, John. Thank you.
Who says the bear isn't here? I mean,
I think you should have a teddy bear whenever anybody asks about it. Just like pick up a little teddy bear.
Yeah, it's a way to make news, I guess. That's what it is.
Thank you, John.
All right. Well,
all
look
the
forward to
best.
being with you, Steve, on your show. So, and give Tucker and Sean and Laura a message that they ought to have on a business guy who's actually going to fix this state.
Fair point. Thank you, John. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right. What did you make of that?
I mean, it's interesting. I'm aware of him. I'm aware of him having run before. I mean, I'm such a California politics nerd that I remember way back when Neil Kashkari was GOP.
Oh, right.
nominee.
Yeah. That's right. That was the first race when I moved here. So I've been here 2012. I remember that. That was 2014. Exactly.
Yeah. Because my husband and I moved here in 2013 when I was pregnant with our firstborn. And I remember being like, oh, I like Neil. I wish he had addressed like some things. He seemed very Republican light to me. I think I've been aware of John for a long time. We're not personal friends. Obviously, Larry Elder and I were previously colleagues at a radio station. So I have a soft spot for him. Mm-hmm. I am always I don't know if you know this about me, but I have worked on campaigns in the past and consulted on campaigns in the past. And consultants typically say, you try not to sling mud at the other guy. And I think that it's okay to sling mud at the other guy if it's Gavin Newsom in this case. But I get a little faint of heart when I see Republicans doing it with each other. I think that there is space to have a broader tent and to try to grow our voting base in the state. And I think a lot of the candidates have a positive argument that can appeal to those 7 million unidentified, or no party voters that John referenced.
I completely agree with everything you just said. And I think that it's interesting that it's been great on this show. We've had a really, we've spoken to Kevin Kiley, Caitlyn Jenner, Larry himself, John Cox. And actually, when you think about all of that, I've made this point before, but I think it even more now, having spoken to more of them, is that there's actually, these are talented people in different ways. They've got a different argument. They're out there fighting. That's great. It shows that there's real energy on the Republican side. And I think that, what he's saying about the executive role there and having a business, I take those points, but you still need, I think, something more concrete in terms of, what are the specific things you're going to do? And actually some of the other candidates, I heard that more clearly from.
That's an interesting point. I think that, yes, it could be said that when you get paid to talk for a living, you might not have as much depth. But I think that honestly, a lot of politicians, even if they have experience that they try to tout in campaign ads, also don't have that much depth. So I'm kind of willing to throw anything at the wall and see what will work in this state. And I think any of these Republicans is going to be better than Gavin Newsom. I know any of these Republicans would be better than Gavin Newsom.
Totally. And also the other thing about that, just even if you're completely right about that, because just a yes on that first question, it would just be so transformative. And I think not just actually in California, just it'll be heard around the country with wow, you can't, the people can have a say. It's not just like all in one direction. And I was making this point the other day, which is that just with everything going on at the national level, I think that feeds into this because people are so frustrated. A lot of people are so frustrated with what they see happening, with Afghanistan and so on. You think, well, what's that got to do with California? I think there's this desire for some accountability when things go wrong. And when you've seen this total collapse of leadership, complete disaster, and no one's apologized, no one's been fired, no one's taken responsibility, there's like no accountability. In California, at least, with the recall, there's an opportunity to actually have your voice heard. And I think that's powerful. Just that, it gives people hope.
And what's so funny is even this week, we've seen Democrats talk about how this voice being heard should be quashed. I mean, I think even Kevin Kiley said, and other Republicans in the race have said, you guys realize that if Newsom doesn't get recalled here, he's going to do everything that he can on the executive level to quash recalls in the future. And I was like, this should scare Democrats, right? Especially if you're a Democrat that didn't love the last 4 years of the president, or if you're a Democrat that's afraid of Ron DeSantis or whatever, like the recall is actually a very beautiful democratic option that we have. And I don't know why they would want to be rid of that. So I actually encourage Democrats to participate in this recall, because it's an incredible thing that we have the possibility of doing.
I know, but they're just so short term. You know, and it's all about the political tactic that gets them through the next problem. And so that's, I think, how they're approaching it. And I think they're really, genuinely worried about it in a way where they just completely dismissed it for most of the time.
Might disagree with you there. I don't think the Democrats are short term. I think they're eerily long term and do better at planning for the long term than the Republican Party and the conservative movement does. But I think I understand what you meant there, is that they are pushing for this because they understand the negative effects this could have on their hold on power for the future.
Yes, and in fact, you're right, and in fact, I'm giving them too much credit for intellectual consistency and coherence, because they could just as easily say, we're, and you see this the whole time. They'll be against the recall now, the concept of a recall. Oh, it's undemocratic. Yep. But then, in a few years' time, if it's the other way around and it's a Republican governor that they want to recall, suddenly they'll be all for it, and they'll completely forget that that 5 minutes ago this was completely undemocratic and something that we should not have in our Constitution.
Yeah, I had the same thoughts when Kamala Harris was going after pro-life organizations and wanting to reveal their donors. I'm like, guys, I like the shoe on other foot argument. Could you imagine if a Republican attorney general, I don't know, like formerly Scott Pruitt of Oklahoma, as a Southern Baptist, was like, I'm going to go and find out all of the donors to my Democratic opponent? It's outrageous. And I don't understand why they don't have the logic there. And I think it's because they're just drunk with power and will do anything to hang on to it.
Yeah, well, that's why this is such an exciting moment, and it's interesting. There is a lot of attention on it around the country because it just feels like, long overdue. There's this arrogance, isn't there? This arrogance of just being in power for so long with no real, and that's why it's so bad. It's always the case. If you have power that is unaccountable, unchecked, they get complacent. There's no challenge. You see, that's another reason I think that our show, if I may say so, is going to be really important, because you see in the media too, in California, there's just no real accountability for the disastrous governance that we've seen. It's not really covered because they're also, on the Democrat side.
Yeah, and I also think that there's such I want to get the interview with that guy when he is in power, which hopefully then helps my ratings or makes my GM happy. And so therefore, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and not be a real journalist. I think there are very few journalists, and I have often told people I do not identify as a journalist. Maybe I should, and I could get more interviews. But I think that it's really important to have true journalists out there that you should be able to watch and see them interview a John Cox and ask tough questions, or Gavin Newsom and ask tough questions. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times, like, Republicans get asked harder questions by Republican people in media than they do of the Democrats ever do of the other side.
Yeah, I mean, the deference that is shown to the Democrats here is just laughable. And the
More
way
like,
that you
know what, kissing.
Exactly. And then the other thing I find just unbelievable is the way that they, even as they report the news, they they insert Democrat talking points as if they are acting as the communications aides for the Democrat politicians that they're trying to cover. It's unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of a sidebar, but along that, just the level of control that politicians have been given, and I would love to rip some of that control out of their eager egos. My family and I were just at Disney actually 12 days ago now. So none of us have COVID. So now I'm beginning to think that maybe COVID doesn't exist if we didn't contract it at Disneyland. But when I was there, I was looking around and I'm like, wow, all of these cast members, all of these people that are here with their families from Southern California, like this location, this business, this massive corporation was stuck under the heel of the state and federal government for a year and a half? And all of the thousands of jobs that were affected by that, and the local area and the schools and the economy. And it's just like, when you can see that so tactilely. I really hope that spurs voters to get out there and think about their local bodega or their grocery store or their dry cleaner or their kid's school, and then vote yes on the recall. That's all I have to say about that.
It's a great point and a great place to leave it, I think, because in the end, that's the real practical difference this election can make. Because if he stays in power, you're just going to see more of that back. Whereas whoever is the Republican replacement will be all for opening things up and getting people back to work and getting the schools open without all these stupid restrictions. It really will. You will see a big difference quickly. That's why this vote matters so much. Elisha, great to see you today. Thank you so much.
Fun being here.
Well, that'll do it for us today. Thank you for being with us again on California Rebel Base. Make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Help us get the word out. Leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it. And see you next time on California Rebel Base.